He only wanted to live alone. Until a wounded nun collapsed at his doorstep. From that moment, neither of them had a way back. Thank you for being kind. Now, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with the number 1 so I'll know you're ready to hear this powerful story for grown hearts. Now let's step into part 1 of this tale, where silence, memory, and an unexpected knock at the door would change everything. He hadn't touched a woman in 12 years. He hadn't laughed in twice that long. Up in those dry Arizona hills, he lived by routine the way a monk lives, by prayer, strict, lonely, unbroken. He cut wood-set traps, kept his rifle oiled. The days passed without color, and that suited him fine. Now and then, in the silence, memory would snake its way back Tennessee, the smoke, the screams, a girl's face vanishing into fire, while he stood helpless. James never spoke her name. He didn't need to. The memory clung like the smell of burned timber that never quite washes out. It was easier to live as if he were already half dead. That evening had been no different from 100 others. He'd come in from the ridge, with a rabbit slung over his shoulder, set it by the door, and lit the stove for a thin supper. Outside, the sky had gone violet with dusk, the air carrying the faint tang of creosote after the day's heat. Nothing stirred but wind through the pines. Then it happened. From the tree line came a shape, stumbling, swaying, fighting for breath. At first, he thought it was a drunk who'd wandered too far, or maybe a prospector caught in the sun. But when the figure broke into the clearing, James froze. She was a woman, barefoot, clothes torn to rags, skin streaked with dirt and blood. No, not just a woman. The tatters clinging to her frame were once a nun's habit, though so shredded it barely covered her. In one hand, she clutched a broken crucifix like a lifeline. She made it 3 more steps, then collapsed hard onto the dust right in front of his porch. James dropped to his knees beside her. Her lips moved cracked and dry, whispering 2 words he almost didn't catch. "Please don't." His chest tightened. She wasn't bleeding much on the outside, but when he eased the fabric from her shoulders, his breath caught in his throat. Her back looked as though someone had branded her like cattle. Burns welt symbols carved deep into flesh, letters twisted into her skin by fire and cruelty. Not the kind of marks men leave in drunken violence, but the kind left by zealots who believe pain is a language. James staggered back a step, heart pounding. For a moment, he wasn't in Arizona anymore. He was back in Tennessee, standing over another broken body, too late to save her. He'd walked away once. He'd sworn never again. So he did the only thing his soul would let him do. He shrugged off his coat, laid it gently over her trembling frame, and lifted her into his arms. She was light, far too light bones, sharp beneath fevered skin. Without a word, he carried her inside. The cabin was little more than a single room with a cot, a stove, and shelves lined with tools, but it was shelter. He laid her down carefully, the coat wrapped around her like a shield. She curled into it, shivering. Her eyes darted around the room wide and hunted until they found his. For a heartbeat, something passed between them. Fear, yes, but also the faintest spark of recognition. James didn't ask questions. Questions could wait. Instead, he lit a fire in the stove, not for warmth, but for the sound the way its crackle gave the room a pulse. He boiled water, laid out a tin cup. Every so often, he glanced back at her. She hadn't let go of that broken cross. When he finally offered her a sip, her hand trembled, but she took it, swallowed once, twice. The cup rattled as she set it back down. Her voice was hoarse, but this time clearer. Water. That single word struck him harder than a bullet, because it meant she was still here, still fighting. James sat back, watching the firelight dance against the walls, and realized with a chill he hadn't felt in years that his life had just changed. Whatever hell this woman had crawled from, it wasn't finished with her. And now, for better or worse, it wasn't finished with him either. Some nights stretch on forever, and this was one of them. James Coulter had carried many burdens in his time, war, loss, regret, but the weight of one broken woman lying in his cabin felt heavier than all the years behind him. He thought perhaps she would die in her sleep, that by morning he'd be left with a body to bury, and more ghosts to haunt him. But she didn't die. She clung to life with the stubbornness of a wildflower in desert stone. She never let go of that broken crucifix. The hours passed. The fire hummed low in the stove, its light playing across the scarred boards of the cabin. Outside, the night wind rose and fell like a restless spirit. James sat at the table cleaning his rifle again, though it was already spotless. He wasn't watching the gun. He was watching her. Near dawn, she stirred. Her head turned just enough for her eyes to find him. For the first time, they held steady. He expected fear, suspicion, but what he saw instead was something else. A question, maybe even trust. He offered her more water. This time, she reached for it without hesitation. Her lips trembled as she drank, but her hands didn't pull away. She whispered nothing, asked nothing. Yet James felt the cabin shift, as though the walls themselves knew that silence no longer belonged to death alone. By the second day, she rose to sit against the wall. Her body shook with the effort, but she did it. He handed her a piece of bread, and she took it. Small things. But small things meant survival. Late that afternoon, while James was out front splitting kindling, the crunch of hooves broke the stillness. He straightened axe in one hand, every nerve alert. A rider came up the ridge road, fancy vest, slick mustache, the look of a man who belonged behind a ledger, not on horseback. The stranger reined in at the porch, eyes sweeping past James toward the shadowed doorway. "Evenin', old man," he said, voice oily. "You seen a nun pass through here? Word is one's gone missing from down south." James felt his gut tighten. He didn't ask how the man knew. Didn't ask what business a banker-looking fellow had chasing holy women through the hills. He just let the axe rest against the woodpile, hand free and close to the revolver at his belt. "No one's come by," James said flatly. The man's grin didn't reach his eyes. "That's so, name's Ellie Rose." Small thing, brown hair scar on her cheek. From inside, James heard the faintest rattle, the cot shifting, or maybe the crucifix slipping in her hand. She knew he was speaking of her. "She ain't here," James repeated, voice steady as iron. The stranger studied him a moment longer, then spat into the dirt. "Reckon you'd best mind your own coulter. Old soldier like you don't want to cross the kind of folks I ride for." With that, he tugged his reins and turned back down the ridge. Dust rose behind him, carried off by the wind. James stood there a long while, jaw tight. He hadn't told the man his name, which meant whoever was hunting her already knew too much. That night, as he sat by the fire with the shotgun across his knees, he heard her voice for the first time, soft but clear. Why, he looked over. Her eyes shone in the flickering light, tired but awake. "Why lie for me? You don't even know me." James stared into the fire a long moment before answering. "Maybe I don't need to." She said nothing more, but she didn't look away either. For a man who had lived 12 years in silence, that single exchange felt louder than cannon fire. Outside, the night pressed close heavy with what was coming. James knew danger would return, and next time it wouldn't be one man in a vest. He could almost hear the hoofbeats already echoing up from the valley below. Some storms give warning before they break. This one had already begun. Some lies buy you peace for a day, maybe two. James Coulter knew the man in the vest would be back, and he wouldn't come alone next time. For a while, though, the hills were quiet. Too quiet. James had lived through sieges before. He knew the hush that falls when the enemy is gathering strength. And now, with the strange nun in his cabin, he knew the quiet wasn't waiting for him. It was waiting for her. On the third night, the silence broke. It started with a cry, sharp and raw, tearing through the cabin like a blade. James dropped the tin cup he was holding and spun toward the cot. She was thrashing hands, clawing at the air, whispering a litany of words that weren't prayers, but pleadings. "No, please, don't take it. Don't burn me again." James crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand closing gently around her wrist. "Agnes," he said firmly, though he wasn't sure she'd ever told him her name. Somehow, he just knew it. "Wake up." Her eyes shot open, pupils wide, breath ragged. For a moment she stared at him as if he were another tormentor. Then slowly, recognition came. The fight left her body, and she crumpled forward, clutching the broken crucifix like it was the last piece of herself left in the world. James didn't let go. He'd seen soldiers break down like this, men twice his size, sobbing into their hands after battle. He knew what it was to come apart in the dark. Her voice was hoarse when it finally came. They said pain was holy. They said the flesh had to be burned so the soul could shine. And I believed them for a time, until I smelled my own skin. James swallowed hard, his grip tightening just enough to anchor her. It was no church, she whispered. No convent. A camp in the hills run by men who call themselves brothers. They take the lost and break them, body first, spirit after. Said I was chosen, that my faith made me a vessel. But when they carved their symbols into me, I asked for God, and he was silent. Her eyes lifted to his wet but fierce. Tell me, James, where was he? The question hit him harder than any bullet. He could have lied, offered some scripture long forgotten. But he wasn't a preacher. He was a man who'd seen the world bleed. I don't know, he admitted, voice low. All I know is they didn't finish you. You're here, and they'll have to go through me to touch you again. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded once, sharp as a vow, and in that nod, James saw it the spark of someone who hadn't given up yet. From that moment, things changed. The next morning, James pulled down the old tools of his soldiering days. He patched the holes in the cabin walls, laid tripwires at the tree line, set snares that could double as alarms. His hands moved with grim purpose, the way they had when the enemy was closing in on Tennessee all those years ago. Agnes watched him silent at first, but when he placed a revolver on the table, she flinched. I can't, she whispered. You can, James said. I'll show you. Her hand shook when she picked it up, the weight unfamiliar. He guided her stance, steadying her arms. She closed one eye, pulled the trigger. The shot cracked into the dirt outside, echoing through the hills. She nearly dropped the gun, but she didn't. James nodded. Again. By afternoon, she could hit a bottle at 20 paces. Her body still trembled, but her eyes grew steadier with each pull of the trigger. It wasn't about becoming a killer. It was about clawing back control. That evening, while James tended a cut on his arm from a stray nail, she sat beside him on the porch. For a long while, they watched the sun sink red over the ridge. Finally, she spoke. They'll come soon, she said. I know, James replied. As if on cue, the distant thunder of hooves rolled through the valley, not close yet, but closer than comfort. Agnes gripped the crucifix in one hand, the revolver in the other. James rose his shotgun in his grip, eyes hard on the tree line. Then let him come. The first battle was still ahead, but already the war had begun. The storm is coming. Don't miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed. Some storms give you time to run. Others pin you in place and dare you to stand. James Coulter knew this storm wouldn't pass by. It was coming straight for his door. The hoofbeats Agnes had heard in the valley grew louder with each passing day. By the fourth evening, the hills themselves seemed to hold their breath. No birds, no crickets, just the hush before a match is struck. James had lived through war, and he recognized the silence of men moving into position. He and Agnes spoke little. Words were wasted when hands had work to do. He set more traps along the ridge, sharpened knives, checked the shotgun twice, then a third time. Agnes, though still pale from her wounds, walked the perimeter at his side, eyes sharp. The revolver no longer shook in her grip. When the first torchlight appeared through the trees, James felt his body steady. Fear had its place, but once the fight began, there was no room for it. They'll circle the cabin, he told her. Stay low, call out what you see. She nodded, clutching both crucifix and pistol, as though the two together might anchor her. The attack began, sudden and hard. A rifle cracked splinters flying from the doorframe. James dropped flat, fired through the open window, and heard the scream of a man toppling from his horse. Another torch sailed through the air. Agnes darted forward, stamping it out before the flames could catch the wall. The siege was relentless. Shadows moved between trees, voices chanting words that made her blood run cold. These weren't ranch hands or drunk outlaws. They were believers twisted into zealots who thought cruelty was a form of worship. Hours blurred. James fought with the grim patience of a soldier, using every inch of terrain he knew. A snare caught one man by the leg, another stumbled into a pit lined with sharpened stakes. Each scream out there in the dark bought them another minute inside. But the cult didn't break. They pressed closer, their chanting louder, until the very earth seemed to throb with it. At last the front door shuddered beneath a heavy blow. James braced it with his shoulder shotgun ready. Then the door burst open, and the leader stepped through. He wasn't what Agnes expected. No wild-eyed beast, no ragged savage. He wore a black coat clean and pressed his hair neatly combed. His eyes, though those, burned like coals in the pit of hell. "Child," he said, his voice smooth as a sermon, "you've wandered far from the light. Come back and the pain will end." Agnes stiffened, pressing her back to the wall. James leveled the shotgun, but the man only smiled. "You, Coulter, old soldier, you think you can guard her forever? You couldn't even guard the girl in Tennessee." James flinched, the words striking deeper than any bullet. He hadn't spoken of Tennessee to a soul. How did this man know? The leader took another step inside, raising his arms like a priest at the altar. "You both carry scars. Give her to me, and I'll make yours mean something. Refuse, and I'll write my mark into your very bones." The chant outside rose, fists beating against the cabin walls. Agnes trembled, torn between terror and fury. She saw James falter, the memory of old failure rising to choke him. For one sickening instant, she feared he might lower the gun. "No," she whispered. Then louder, "No." She lifted the revolver, both hands steady now. The leader turned to her, mock pity on his lips. "Little sister, you haven't the strength." Agnes fired. The shot cracked through the cabin, throwing him backward into the doorway. His face, so smug a moment before, went slack with shock as he crumpled to the floor. The chanting faltered outside, confusion spreading like fire through dry brush. James surged forward, dragging the body out into the torchlight for all to see. "Your shepherd is dead," he roared, voice booming across the ridge. "Leave or join him." One by one the torches wavered, then scattered. The night grew still again, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the rasp of James's breath. Inside, Agnes lowered the revolver. Her hands shook only after it was done. She looked at James, eyes wide, not with fear this time, but with something fiercer. Resolve. He took the pistol gently from her, set it aside, and pulled her close. "You did what I couldn't," he murmured. "You stood." The fire in the stove flickered low. Dawn was still hours away, and the long night wasn't done. But the tide had turned. Together they had faced the storm and lived. Not all victories come with cheers. Some arrive in silence, leaving only smoke and broken walls behind. When the chanting faded and the last torchlight vanished into the hills, James Coulter leaned against the shattered doorframe, his shotgun heavy in his arms. His chest burned with every breath, but he was alive. Agnes, too, though her hands still trembled from the weight of the revolver. The cabin was half ruined now. Windows blown out, splinters scattered across the floor, blood staining the threshold. Yet somehow it still stood. Like the two of them. James glanced at her in the dim firelight. Her habit was torn, her face drawn pale, but her eyes, they no longer looked hunted. They looked awake, alive. "They'll come back," she whispered. He shook his head. "Not tonight. Not after losing him." She lowered herself to the chair by the table, laying the broken crucifix before her. For the first time, she didn't clutch it like a drowning soul to driftwood. She just looked at it, and then with slow, steady hands, she set it aside. Dawn crept in, pale and cold, spilling across the hills. Smoke curled from the chimney in thin gray ribbons. James stepped outside, the chill biting, and surveyed the ground. The traps were sprung, the earth scarred with boot prints, blood, and ash. The ridge smelled of gunpowder and fire. He thought of Tennessee. thought of the girl he hadn't saved. Then turned back to the cabin and realized that for the first time in years, the weight on his chest had eased. He had stood his ground. He had not failed. Inside, Agnes rose to meet him. She was tired, her body ravaged by wounds not yet healed, but she walked without wavering. "I can't go back," she said simply. "Not to the convent. Not after what they've done. My faith, it's not gone. It's just no longer bound by stone walls and vows I no longer believe in." James studied her, then nodded once. He understood. Some wars end when you leave the battlefield. Others end when you choose a different road. "We'll go down off this hill," he said. "Find a place they don't know. Start over." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something close. "Together then, together," he answered. They gathered what little they could, his rifle a sack of food, the coat he had first wrapped around her. The cabin, though scarred and half-broken, had been their crucible. It had burned away silence and despair, left only two survivors bound by something deeper than either expected. As they stepped into the morning light side by side, James felt the desert wind on his face, and for once didn't taste bitterness. He didn't know where the trail would lead, whether safety or another storm waited down the line. But he knew this. He would no longer walk it alone. Agnes lifted her face to the sky, the sun catching in her hair. She carried no weapon now, only the strength she had found in fire and pain. James watched her, and in her steady stride, he saw his own redemption. Together they descended the ridge, leaving behind the ashes. Ahead lay the unknown, and for the first time in 12 long years, James welcomed it. In the ashes of violence and sorrow, James and Agnes discovered that redemption is never beyond reach. Their scars did not vanish, but they learned that God's grace often comes through the compassion of strangers and the courage to stand for life. This story reminds us that faith is not confined to stone walls, but lives in every act of mercy. The Lord's message is clear. Healing begins when we choose to protect, forgive, and walk together. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe for more Wild West tales of faith, redemption, and survival.